The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the translation devices. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive chamber, his hands locked in energy cuffs that glowed with a soft blue light. Around him, 5 different alien species sat in judgment, their faces unreadable to human eyes. The lead judge was a creature made of living crystal. Its voice came through the translator as cold and emotionless. Captain Jake Morrison of Earth, you stand accused of unauthorized military action in protected space. How do you respond? Jake lifted his chin. His uniform was torn and dirty from the battle 3 days ago. He had not been allowed to clean up or rest since his arrest. I saved 3,000 lives. That's how I respond. The crystal being's facets shifted, reflecting rainbow colors across the room. You violated Confederation law. You deployed military forces without approval from this council. Your actions could have started a war. My actions stopped a massacre, Jake said, his voice rising. I sent 6 requests for help. 6 times I told you that raiders were attacking the colony on Belmont 3. 6 times you told me to wait for proper authorization. By the time you finished your paperwork, everyone on that planet would have been dead. One of the other judges, a floating jellyfish-like creature, pulsed with angry red colors. You humans think you can ignore our laws. You think your way is always right. This is why your species is dangerous. Jake wanted to shout, to argue, to make them understand. But he had been a military officer long enough to know when a fight was already lost. This trial was just for show. They had decided his fate before he ever entered this room. Lieutenant Amy Parker sat in the observation gallery above. She gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. She had served under Jake for 6 years. She knew he was a good man, a good captain. This trial was wrong, but there was nothing she could do. The crystal judge spoke again. Captain Morrison, you are found guilty of unauthorized military action, violation of Confederation military protocols, and endangering diplomatic relations. You are sentenced to 200 cycles in cryostasis prison. The room erupted in whispers. 200 years. It was essentially a death sentence. Everyone Jake knew would be dead when he woke up. His entire life gone. Jake felt his legs go weak, but he forced himself to stand straight. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. I would do it again, he said clearly. Every single time. Guards approached from both sides. They were tall reptilian beings with rough green skin. They grabbed Jake's arms and began to lead him away. As he passed below the observation gallery, he looked up and found Amy's eyes. Tell them, he called out to her.
Tell Earth what happened here.
Tell them that I am not sorry. Tell them that humans remember. Amy nodded, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed words he could not hear but understood anyway. I will. The guards took Jake through long corridors made of metal and glass. Other beings moved past them, barely glancing at the human prisoner. To them, Jake was just another criminal being processed. They did not know the full story. They did not care. The Cryo-Prison facility was in orbit around a dead moon. The shuttle ride took 2 hours. Jake spent that time looking out at the stars, wondering if he would ever see Earth again. 200 years was a long time. Anything could happen. The facility itself was enormous, a dark structure that blotted out the stars. As they docked, Jake could see hundreds of windows along its surface. Behind each window was a cryopod, holding a prisoner in frozen sleep. Inside, the facility was all white walls and harsh lighting. Automated systems handled most of the work. A robot with multiple arms scanned Jake's body, recording every detail. Another machine stripped him of his uniform and gave him a plain gray suit. A holographic display appeared in front of him, showing legal documents in a dozen languages. The translator voice spoke in flat, emotionless tones. You have the right to appeal your sentence within 30 cycles. You have the right to contact family members before stasis begins. Do you wish to exercise these rights? Jake thought about it. An appeal would go nowhere. The trial had been political theater. As for family, his parents were dead. He had no wife, no children. The military had been his life. No, he said, confirmed. Proceeding with stasis preparation. More machines descended from the ceiling. They attached monitoring devices to Jake's chest and head. They inserted an IV line into his arm. A robot voice explained the process in simple terms. You will feel cold. You will feel sleepy. Do not fight it. The transition will be easier if you relax. Jake was led into a large chamber filled with rows of cryopods. Each pod was a clear cylinder, just big enough for one person to stand inside. His pod was number 7389. Just a number now, not a name. He stepped inside. The curved door closed in front of him with a soft hiss. Through the clear material, he could see the robot arms moving around outside, making final adjustments. The cold started at his feet and moved up. It was not painful, just uncomfortable. His breath fogged in front of his face. Ice crystals began to form on the inside of the pod. Jake's last conscious thoughts were not about fear or regret. He thought about the families on Belmont 3 who were alive because of his choice. He thought about the children who would grow up, have lives, because he had acted. He thought about Amy Parker and her promise to tell his story. Most of all, he thought about the Confederation and their smug, self-righteous judgment. They had made an enemy today. Maybe Jake Morrison would not be around to see it, but humanity would remember this. Humans always remembered when they were wronged. The cold reached his chest, his neck, his head. His vision grew dim and fuzzy. The last thing he saw was the number on his pod glowing in the darkness. 7389. Just another frozen prisoner in a forgotten facility. But Jake Morrison's anger did not freeze. It stayed warm and alive, waiting in the dark for the day it could burn again. The Confederation thought they had silenced a troublesome human. They thought they had made an example that would keep humanity in line. They were wrong. As the cryo-sleep took full effect and Jake's mind went dark, the facility's computers logged his status. Prisoner 7389. Sentence duration 200 cycles. Expected revival date far in the future. The machines did not care about justice or injustice. They simply recorded the data and moved on to the next task. But 200 years is a long time. Systems fail. Governments fall. The future is never what anyone expects. And somewhere in the frozen darkness a human waited. The warning alarm started softly at first, then grew louder and more urgent. Red lights flashed across the cryo facility in patterns that had not activated in decades. Deep in the frozen storage section, systems that had been dormant for years suddenly came alive with emergency power. Inside pod 7389, chemical warmers activated. Heating elements began to thaw the frozen body inside. The process was supposed to be slow and gentle, taking hours to safely bring a person back from cryo-sleep. But these were emergency protocols, designed for facility evacuation. Fast and rough, but better than dying while still frozen. Jake Morrison's body responded to the warmth flooding through the pod. His heart, which had barely beaten once per minute for 2 centuries, began to speed up. His lungs, which had processed almost no air, started to expand and contract. His brain, preserved in chemical stasis, began firing neurons again. His eyes opened. Everything was blurry. The pod was covered in frost and condensation. Through the foggy material, Jake could see flashing red lights. He tried to move and found his muscles would not obey. His whole body felt wrong, like it belonged to someone else. The pod's door suddenly released with a loud crack. The seal broke and freezing air rushed in. Jake tumbled forward, unable to catch himself. He hit the cold metal floor hard, gasping for breath. Pain shot through his entire body. Every muscle screamed in protest. His lungs burned as they tried to remember how to breathe properly. His vision swam with dark spots. For several minutes, Jake could do nothing but lie on the floor and hurt. Slowly, very slowly, his body began to remember how to function. He managed to roll onto his side. Then he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. His arms shook with the effort. The facility shook around him. A deep booming sound echoed through the walls. More alarms blared. Through the windows, Jake could see debris floating past in space. Something had hit the facility. Something bad. Using the cryopod for support, Jake pulled himself to his feet. His legs barely held him. He looked down at his body and saw how thin he had become. The gray suit hung loose on his frame. 200 years of frozen sleep had taken its toll, but humans were tough. Jake had been a soldier, an athlete, someone who pushed his body to its limits. That old training kicked in now. He took a deep breath, then another. He flexed his fingers, rolled his shoulders, tested his legs. Pain with every movement, but movement was possible. That was enough. The chamber around him was dark except for the emergency lights. Jake counted at least 50 other cryopods in this section alone. All of them were still sealed, still occupied. But no warming lights showed on any of them. Only his pod had activated. Why? What made him special? A computer terminal on the wall flickered to life. Jake stumbled over to it, leaning heavily against the console. The screen showed text in the Confederation's standard language. The translator device in his ear was dead, but Jake had learned enough of the language during his service to understand basic words. Facility status: critical. Orbital decay in progress, all personnel evacuated. Automated revival protocols engaged for viable prisoners. Jake's blood ran cold as he read the next line. Viable prisoners found, 1-1 out of how many? He looked around at the dark pods surrounding him. All those beings still frozen, left behind when the facility was abandoned. They would die when this place crashed. His hands trembled as he accessed more files. The date stamp made him blink and read it again. It had been 203 years since his sentence began. Not 200, 203. They had left him here for 3 extra years beyond his sentence. Jake's jaw clenched. The anger that had frozen with him 2 centuries ago came roaring back, hot and fierce. They had not just imprisoned him. They had forgotten about him, left him to die in an abandoned facility orbiting a dead moon. He dug deeper into the files, his fingers moving faster as his muscle memory returned. The Confederation had collapsed 70 years ago. Civil war had torn apart the alliance of species. The Cryo-Prison had been abandoned during the chaos. All the staff had left. All the guards had gone. The prisoners had been left in their pods to sleep forever. The facility had been on backup power for decades. That power was finally failing. The orbit was decaying. In less than 6 hours, this entire structure would crash into the moon below. Jake pulled up a map of the facility. He needed to find a way out. The shuttle bay was 3 sections away. If he could reach it, if there was still a functional shuttle, he might survive. He pushed away from the console and started walking. Each step was agony. His muscles protested with every movement, but he kept going. Jake Morrison had not survived 200 years in frozen hell just to die now. The corridors were empty and dark. Emergency lights created pools of red illumination every few meters. Jake's footsteps echoed in the silence. Dust covered everything. This place had been dead for a very long time. He passed through a dining area where tables and chairs sat exactly as they had been left. Cups and plates still sat on some tables, meals abandoned in mid-bite when the evacuation order came. Jake wondered if the staff had been told about the prisoners. Did they know they were leaving thousands of beings behind? Did they care? The facility shook again, harder this time. Jake grabbed a railing to keep from falling. Through a window, he could see chunks of the outer hull breaking away and drifting into space. Time was running out. He forced himself to move faster. His legs were getting stronger with each step, his body slowly remembering how to function. By the time he reached the second section, Jake was almost jogging. The shuttle bay doors were sealed. Jake found the manual override panel and punched in the emergency code that all military personnel were required to memorize. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of unused motors, the doors began to slide open. The bay beyond held 6 small shuttles. Only one showed any power readings on its display. Jake climbed aboard, his hands moving over the controls with practiced ease. This was older technology than he was used to, but the basics were the same. The engines whined as they came online. Warning lights flashed on the console, showing system failures and low fuel. But the shuttle was functional enough to fly. That was all Jake needed. He strapped himself into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence. The bay doors opened to reveal the starfield beyond. Jake could see the moon below, its gray surface growing closer as the facility's orbit continued to decay. With a burst of thrust, the shuttle lifted off the deck and shot out into space. Jake did not look back. Behind him, the cryo-prison that had held him for 2 centuries grew smaller and smaller. 30 minutes later, a bright flash lit up the darkness. The facility had finally crashed into the moon, breaking apart on impact. Thousands of frozen prisoners, forgotten and abandoned, were gone. Jake Morrison was the only survivor. He set course for the nearest inhabited system and allowed himself to relax slightly. His body ached. His mind was reeling from everything he had learned. 200 years. The Confederation was gone. Everyone he had known was dead, but he was alive. Against all odds, despite everything they had done to him, Jake Morrison was alive, and he was very, very angry. The shuttle drifted through empty space, its fuel gauge dropping slowly toward 0. Jake sat in the pilot's seat, his body still adjusting to being awake after 2 centuries. Every muscle ached, but the pain was getting better. He had found emergency rations in the shuttle's storage compartment. The food was old and tasted terrible, but it gave him energy. The navigation computer showed the nearest inhabited station was 3 days away at current speed. Jake had enough fuel to reach it, barely. He set the autopilot and turned his attention to the shuttle's database. What he found there changed everything. The files were old, dating back to when the facility was still operational, but they contained news archives, historical records, and updates about galactic affairs. Jake started reading, and hours passed as he absorbed the information. The Confederation had lasted only 40 years after his imprisonment. The cracks had always been there, tensions between species that the government structure barely held together. When humanity started pushing for equal representation and more independence, other species saw it as a threat. Some sided with humans, others opposed them. War broke out, not the clean, regulated conflict that Confederation rules allowed. Real war, brutal and total. Species chose sides. Fleets clashed. Colonies burned. Humanity had not started the war, but they had finished it. Cut off from Confederation support and facing extinction, humans had tapped into something the other species had forgotten. Desperation, innovation, the absolute refusal to surrender. Jake read battle reports with growing amazement. Human fleets, using tactics that broke every rule of civilized warfare. Suicide runs, trap ambushes, weapons that other species considered too cruel to use. In 50 years of fighting, humanity went from being junior members of the Confederation to being the most feared military force in known space. The Confederation finally collapsed under the weight of the war. What remained split into dozens of smaller governments. And humanity? They formed the Terran Alliance, a loose confederation of human colonies and allied species. According to the database, the Alliance now controlled nearly a quarter of known space. Jake sat back in his seat trying to process it all. The galaxy he remembered was gone. The government that had imprisoned him no longer existed. Everything had changed. He pulled up files about Earth and felt his throat tighten. The planet had suffered during the war. Several major cities had been destroyed in orbital strikes. Billions had died, but Earth had survived. Humans had survived. Then he found the memorial files, and his hands started shaking. Amy Parker. She had made it back to Earth after his trial. She had spent the next 40 years fighting for his release, writing letters, giving speeches, trying to convince people that his imprisonment was wrong. She became famous for it, the woman who would not let the galaxy forget Jake Morrison. She died at age 72. The memorial said she never gave up hope that he would be freed. Jake had to stop reading. He put his face in his hands and let himself feel the weight of it. Amy had spent her entire life fighting for him. She had died, never knowing if he would wake up. He forced himself to keep reading. His old crew, the people he had served with, many of them had become important figures in the early Alliance. They told stories about the Belmont 3 incident, about how Jake Morrison had defied the Confederation to save lives. Those stories became legends. Young officers studied his tactics. His name was taught in military academies. And Jake Morrison himself? According to official records, he died in Cryo-Prison when the facility was abandoned during the Confederation collapse. There was a memorial station named after him, scholarships in his name, his face on recruiting posters. He was a dead hero, a symbol of humanity's struggle for independence. Except he was not dead. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. The galaxy thought he was gone. Everyone believed the story. And maybe that was better. Dead heroes were inspiring. Live ones were complicated, but Jake was not interested in being a symbol. He was interested in what came next. The shuttle's proximity alarm beeped. Jake checked the sensors and saw a ship approaching. It was small, a patrol vessel. The identification signal marked it as Terran Alliance. Jake opened a communication channel. Static filled the cabin for a moment. Then a young voice came through. Unidentified shuttle. This is Alliance Patrol Ship Ranger. You are entering restricted space. Identify yourself immediately. Jake took a breath. Here went everything. This is Captain Jake Morrison, formerly of the Confederation Defense Force. I require assistance. Silence. Then, say again. Did you say Jake Morrison? That is correct. I just escaped from the old Cryo-Prison facility before it crashed. I need to dock somewhere and contact Alliance Command. More silence. Jake could imagine the confusion on the patrol ship. Then another voice came on, older and more authoritative. This is Lieutenant Chris Hayes, commanding officer of the Ranger. Sir Jake Morrison is listed as deceased. Can you provide verification of your identity? I can give you my service number and biometric data. You can compare it against military records. Stand by. Jake waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, Chris Hayes came back on the line and his voice was shaking. Sir, your biometrics match. This is impossible, but the computer confirms you are who you say you are. We are approaching to escort you to Kepler Station 7. Please do not deviate from your course. Understood. The patrol ship came alongside Jake's shuttle. Through the viewport, Jake could see it clearly. The design was different from ships he remembered, sleeker and more aggressive. The Alliance symbol was painted on the hull, a star surrounded by a circle, simple and strong. The journey to Kepler Station 7 took 6 hours. Jake used the time to clean himself up as best he could and to think about what he would say. He was a ghost, returning from the dead. That would create problems, questions, investigations. But he was also Jake Morrison, and the galaxy had spent 200 years making him into a legend. That might be useful. Kepler Station 7 was enormous, a massive wheel rotating in space. Hundreds of ships were docked at various ports. The station showed signs of military presence everywhere: patrol ships, defense platforms. This was not just a civilian outpost. This was a fortress. The Ranger guided Jake's shuttle to a private docking bay. As he touched down and powered off the engines, Jake could see armed soldiers waiting outside, not arresting him, he realized, guarding him. They thought he was important. He was right. When the airlock opened, Jake found himself facing a dozen people. Soldiers in modern uniforms, officers with rank insignia he did not recognize, and at the front, Lieutenant Chris Hayes. He was young, maybe 25, with short dark hair and wide eyes. Chris saluted sharply. Sir, welcome to Kepler Station 7. I have been instructed to escort you to secure quarters until Alliance Command can be contacted. Jake returned the salute, muscle memory taking over. Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate the warm welcome. Sir, if I may say, we thought you were dead. Everyone thought you were dead. This is going to change everything. Jake stepped out of the shuttle, his legs steady now. The station's gravity felt good after days in the weak pull of the shuttle. He looked at the young officer and smiled grimly. Good, he said. It is time for some changes. News of Jake Morrison's return spread across Alliance space faster than light-speed communication. Within hours, every major news network was running the story. The dead hero was alive. The legend was real. Social networks exploded with reactions ranging from disbelief to celebration. Jake watched some of the coverage from his quarters on Kepler, Station 7. The room was comfortable, but clearly designed to keep him contained. Guards stood outside his door. Not prisoners' guards, but honor guards. Still, the message was clear. He was not free to move around yet. On the screen, a news anchor spoke with barely contained excitement. To repeat our breaking story, Captain Jake Morrison, the hero of Belmont 3 and symbol of human resistance against Confederation oppression, is alive. Sources confirm he was recovered from the abandoned Cryo-Prison facility that crashed earlier this week. Alliance officials have not yet made an official statement, but speculation is running wild about what this means. Jake turned off the screen. He had spent the last 3 days being examined by doctors, questioned by intelligence officers, and studied by historians who could not believe they were talking to someone from 2 centuries ago. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Everyone had questions. Tomorrow he would face the Alliance Council. That was the meeting that mattered. He spent the evening reviewing everything he could access about current military affairs. The Alliance had given him limited access to public records and some classified briefings. What he saw troubled him. The Alliance was strong but surrounded. After the Confederation's collapse, several species had formed a new coalition. They called it the Galactic Coalition for Peaceful Cooperation, but everyone knew it was really about containing humanity. The coalition controlled more space than the Alliance. They had more ships, more resources, more allies, but they were not united. Jake could see the cracks in their structure. Different species with different goals, held together only by their common fear of human expansion. That fear was a weapon if someone knew how to use it. The next morning, Jake was transported to Luna Station, humanity's capital. The station orbited Earth's moon and served as the center of Alliance government. As his ship approached, Jake got his first good look at Earth in 2 centuries. The planet looked different. New cities glowed on the night side. Orbital platforms surrounded it like a metal ring. Shipyards stretched for thousands of kilometers, building the vessels that protected human space. Earth had transformed from a single world into an industrial fortress. Luna Station was even more impressive. The structure was massive, large enough to house millions of people. It combined government buildings, military headquarters, residential sectors, and manufacturing facilities all in one place. This was the heart of humanity's power. Jake was escorted to the council chamber by Chris Hayes, who had insisted on accompanying him to Luna Station. The young officer seemed to have appointed himself as Jake's unofficial aide. Jake did not mind. It was good to have someone watching his back. The council chamber was a circular room with a domed ceiling showing the stars above. 7 people sat at a curved table, the highest-ranking military officers in the Alliance. Jake recognized none of them, but he recognized the look in their eyes. These were soldiers who had seen real war. At the center sat Admiral Lisa Grant. She was in her 60s with gray hair cut short and eyes that missed nothing. She stood as Jake entered. "Captain Morrison, welcome. Please sit." Jake took the offered seat facing the council. He sat at attention, hands on his knees, every inch a military officer despite his outdated uniform. Lisa studied him for a moment. "I imagine the last few days have been overwhelming." "That is one word for it, Admiral. You have questions?" "We have questions. Let us start with ours if you do not mind." "What do you want, Captain?" "You have been given a second chance at life in a galaxy that barely resembles the one you left. What are your intentions?" Jake had thought about this question for days. He could have asked for retirement, for a peaceful life somewhere quiet. He had earned that right, but peace was not what he wanted. "I want my command back," he said clearly. "I want to serve. The Alliance is facing threats on multiple fronts. I have read the intelligence reports you provided. I have studied your defensive positions and fleet deployments. You are making mistakes." One of the other admirals, a man named Paul Dixon, frowned. "Captain, with all respect, you have been gone for 200 years. Warfare has evolved. Technology has advanced. What makes you think your experience is relevant?" Jake had expected this question. "Because tactics do not change, Admiral. Tools change. Ships change. But the principles of warfare are constant. And I have something none of you have. I remember the Confederation. I understand how the species in the Coalition think. I fought alongside many of them. They believe humans fight like the old Confederation did, with rules and honor and predictable strategies. That is their weakness." He leaned forward. "You have been trying to prove you are not dangerous. You deploy your fleets defensively. You respond to threats instead of creating them. You fight like you are afraid of what the galaxy thinks. That is exactly what they want. They want you contained and predictable." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "And your suggestion is?" "Stop playing defense. Show them why they should be afraid. Not through random aggression, but through calculated action that demonstrates strength. The Coalition is testing you, looking for weakness. Every time you hesitate, every time you ask permission, you confirm their belief that humans can be controlled." The council members exchanged glances. Another admiral, an older woman named Claire Bennett, spoke up. "You are suggesting we become the aggressor. That could unite the Coalition against us." "The Coalition is already united against you," Jake said. "The question is whether they respect you enough to leave you alone or fear you so little that they keep pushing. Right now you are teaching them that humans can be pushed." Silence filled the chamber. Jake could see them thinking, weighing his words. These were smart people, experienced leaders. They knew he was right, even if they did not want to admit it. Lisa finally spoke. Captain Morrison, your tactical assessment of our current situation is uncomfortably accurate. We have been cautious because we remember the cost of the last war. Billions dead. Earth itself nearly destroyed. We do not want to repeat that. Neither do I, Jake said quietly. But there is a difference between avoiding war and inviting attack. The Coalition needs to know that threatening the Alliance has consequences. Real consequences. Paul Dixon leaned back in his chair. Even if we agreed with your assessment, you have been out of the field for 2 centuries. How do we know you can adapt to modern warfare? Our ships, our weapons, our tactics, everything is different. Then train me, Jake said. Give me a ship and a crew. Let me prove what I can do. If I fail, retire me and turn me into the museum piece everyone thinks I am. But if I succeed, give me the authority to act. Lisa looked at Jake for a long moment. Then she looked at the other council members. Some nodded. Others looked uncertain. Finally, she turned back to Jake. Captain Morrison, we are promoting you to Commodore effective immediately. You will be given command of the experimental ship Valiant and authorization to form a special operations task force. Your mission will be to demonstrate Alliance resolve in contested border regions. You will have tactical freedom to act as you see fit, but you will report directly to this council. Do you accept? Jake felt something tight in his chest loosen. A command, a mission, a purpose. I accept, Admiral. Good. Because there is a situation developing that requires exactly the kind of approach you described. A frontier colony is under threat from coalition raiders. New Perth, population 3,000, diplomatic channels are moving slowly. By the time we get approval to act, people will die. Lisa's expression was grim. Sound familiar? 3,000 people. Just like Belmont 3, 200 years ago. History repeating itself. Jake's hands clenched into fists. When do I leave? Tomorrow. We will provide you with full briefings tonight. Commodore Morrison, understand that this is a test. For you and for your philosophy. The galaxy is watching to see what the return of Jake Morrison means. Make it count. Jake stood and saluted. I will not let you down, Admiral. As he left the council chamber with Chris Hayes beside him, Jake felt more alive than he had since waking up. The galaxy had tried to bury him, tried to make him a dead symbol. But Jake Morrison was very much alive, and he had unfinished business to settle. The Valiant was unlike any ship Jake had ever commanded. Sleek and angular, it looked more like a weapon than a vessel. The hull was made of some dark composite material that seemed to absorb light. Weapon ports lined its surface like the scales of a predator. This was not a ship designed for diplomacy. Jake walked through its corridors with growing appreciation. The crew of 200 moved with efficiency, preparing the ship for immediate departure. They were volunteers, every single one. Word had spread that Jake Morrison was taking command, and applications had flooded in. These people had grown up hearing stories about him. Now they would see if the legend was real. In the briefing room, Jake met his senior officers. Lieutenant Commander Kate Sullivan would serve as his executive officer. She was 32, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Perfect. Commander Ben Pierce handled tactical operations. He was older, maybe 45, with scars on his face from a battle Jake had read about in the reports. A survivor who knew how to fight. Lieutenant Megan Ross controlled communications and intelligence. Young and brilliant, she could hack coalition networks and speak a dozen languages fluently. And then there was Chris Hayes, who Jake had requested as his tactical advisor. The young officer looked both honored and terrified. Jake stood at the head of the briefing table, a holographic display showing the new Perth system. Let me be clear about something, he said. I have been gone for 200 years. My knowledge of current technology is limited. I will rely on all of you to fill those gaps. But I know tactics. I know how to read an enemy, and I know how to win fights that seem impossible. Questions? Kate Sullivan spoke first. Sir, the briefing from Alliance Command says we are supposed to assess the situation and report back before taking action. Are those our orders? Jake smiled grimly. Those are their orders. Here are mine. We are going to New Perth. We are going to eliminate the threat to that colony. We are not going to ask permission. We are not going to negotiate. We are going to show the coalition what happens when they threaten human lives. Clear? Nods around the table. Some looked excited. Others looked nervous. All of them looked ready. The coalition has a fleet of 12 ships blockading New Perth, Ben Pierce said, pulling up tactical data. They are demanding the colonists surrender and agree to coalition governance. It is clearly a test to see how we respond. If we let them take New Perth, they will try the same thing at other colonies. Ship types? Jake asked. Mix of frigates and destroyers. Standard coalition design. Good shields, decent weapons. They outnumber us more than 2 to 1. But they are not expecting us, Jake said. They think we will follow the old playbook, send diplomats, file protests, maybe show up with a fleet in a few weeks. They have time to pressure the colonists into surrendering. He zoomed in on the system's asteroid field. What if we come in fast and quiet? Use the asteroids for cover. Hit them before they know we are there. Megan Ross frowned. Sir, the Valiant is fast, but 12 ships will detect us eventually. Even with surprise, we are outnumbered. Numbers only matter if they can coordinate, Jake said. If we hit them hard enough, fast enough, they will panic, break their formation, force them to react instead of act. Ben, can our weapons punch through their shields? Yes, sir. The Valiant has experimental plasma cannons. One good hit will cripple most of their ships. Then we make every shot count. Kate, plot a course that brings us into the system through the asteroid field. Maximum stealth. I want to be on top of them before they know we are there. Megan, monitor their communications. I want to know the moment they detect us. Chris, pull up everything we have on coalition fleet tactics. I want to know how they think. The crew moved into action. Jake watched them work and felt a familiar sensation. Command. This was what he had been meant to do. The Valiant left Luna Station 12 hours later. The journey to New Perth took 4 days at maximum speed. Jake spent the time drilling the crew, running simulation after simulation. Some of his tactics made the officers uncomfortable. They were aggressive, brutal even, but they were effective. Kate Sullivan voiced the concern on the 3rd day. Sir, the scenarios you are running, they do not leave room for the enemy to surrender. We are essentially planning to destroy their entire fleet. Jake looked at her steadily. Yes. That goes against Alliance rules of engagement. We are supposed to offer terms. The coalition is not following rules of engagement, Jake said. They are blockading a civilian colony, threatening innocents. They broke the rules first. We are just showing them the consequences. The Council might not see it that way. The Council gave me tactical freedom. They knew what they were getting when they gave me this command. Jake softened his tone. Kate, I understand your concern, but this is not about revenge. This is about sending a message. The coalition needs to learn that threatening human colonies is a fatal mistake. If we show mercy now, we invite more attacks. But if we make an example, others will think twice. Kate considered this, then nodded slowly. I hope you are right, sir. So do I. On the 4th day, they reached the New Perth system. Megan's sensors picked up the coalition fleet exactly where intelligence said they would be. 12 ships in a loose blockade formation around the planet. Down on the surface, 3,000 colonists waited to see if anyone would save them. Jake stood on the bridge, studying the tactical display. His crew was at battle stations, every system primed and ready. The Valiant moved silently through the asteroid field, its stealth systems hiding it from coalition sensors. We have one shot at this, Jake said quietly. Ben, target the command ship first. I want it disabled before they can coordinate a response. Kate, as soon as we fire, take us through their formation. Maximum speed. We are going to cut through them like a knife. Weapons ready, Ben reported. Stealth systems at maximum, Kate added. Communications are clear. They do not know we are here, Megan said. Jake took a breath. This was it. The moment that would define whether his return meant something or if he was just a relic from the past. All ships, this is Morrison. Target the lead vessel. Fire on my mark. The Valiant had brought 4 other ships with it, smaller and faster vessels that had stayed hidden in the asteroid field. Now they moved into position, forming a spear with the Valiant at the tip. Mark. Space lit up with weapons fire. Plasma cannons erupted from the Valiant, bright blue bolts that crossed the distance in seconds. The Coalition command ship's shields flared, held for a moment, then collapsed. The plasma tore through the hull, ripping the ship apart from the inside. Before the wreckage had even started to drift, the Valiant was moving. It shot forward at speeds that made the crew press back in their seats. The other Alliance ships followed, their weapons firing in coordinated bursts. The Coalition fleet scattered. They had expected negotiation, maybe a standoff. They had not expected an attack, and certainly not one this aggressive. Ships turned to bring weapons to bear, but the Alliance formation was already through their lines. "Target the frigates on the left flank," Jake ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Kate, bring us around for another pass." The Valiant's weapons spoke again. A Coalition frigate exploded in a ball of fire. Another took critical damage and began to list, its engines dead. The Alliance ships moved like a pack of wolves, striking and withdrawing before the enemy could respond effectively. "They are trying to regroup," Ben reported. 3 ships are forming up to our starboard." "Let them," Jake said. "Megan, are they calling for reinforcements?" "Yes, sir. Distress signals going out on all channels. Jam them. I do not want anyone knowing about this fight until it is over." The battle lasted 23 minutes. When it ended, 8 Coalition ships were destroyed or disabled beyond repair. 3 had fled into hyperspace, damaged and running. 1 had surrendered and was being secured by Alliance forces. Not a single Alliance ship had been lost. The Valiant had taken minor damage to its shields, but nothing serious. Jake stood on the bridge, looking at the tactical display with satisfaction. 3,000 colonists on New Perth were safe. The Coalition had learned a hard lesson. "Megan, open a channel to Alliance Command." "Channel open, sir." Admiral Lisa Grant's face appeared on the main screen. She looked at the battle data scrolling beside her image, then at Jake. "Commodore Morrison, your orders were to assess the situation and report back." "I assessed it, Admiral. The situation required immediate action. New Perth is secure. The Coalition fleet has been neutralized. You destroyed 8 ships." "Yes, ma'am." Lisa was quiet for a moment. Jake could not read her expression. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "The Coalition is screaming about human aggression. They are filing formal complaints. They are threatening economic sanctions. And their ambassador just contacted us requesting a meeting to discuss new boundaries for their operations. It seems they want to ensure there are no more misunderstandings." Lisa's smile widened. "Congratulations, Commodore. You just bought us more diplomatic leverage in one afternoon than we have had in 5 years." Jake felt tension leave his shoulders. "Thank you, Admiral. Do not thank me yet. You have started something here. The galaxy is going to react. Make sure you are ready for what comes next." The transmission ended. Jake turned to his crew. They were staring at him with expressions ranging. The following weeks changed everything. News of the New Perth victory spread across human space like wildfire. Jake Morrison, the legend returned from the dead, had smashed a Coalition fleet without breaking a sweat. Videos of the battle circulated on every network. Analysis showed the ruthless efficiency of the attack, the perfect coordination, the complete domination. But it was not just humans celebrating. 3 other species, smaller governments that had felt bullied by the Coalition, quietly reached out to the Alliance. They wanted to talk about mutual defense agreements, about trade deals, about maybe joining the Alliance entirely. The Coalition, meanwhile, went into crisis mode. Their military council held emergency meetings. Their diplomats worked overtime to downplay the defeat. But everyone could see the truth. They had tested humanity's resolve, and humanity had answered with overwhelming force. Jake spent those weeks at Luna Station, giving testimony to the council, being interviewed by intelligence officers and training with his crew. The Valiant remained on high alert, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Everyone knew the Coalition would respond eventually. The question was how. The answer came on a cold morning when Admiral Lisa Grant called Jake to an emergency meeting. He arrived to find the entire military council assembled, along with several civilian leaders. The mood was tense. "Commodore Morrison, we have a situation," Lisa said without preamble. "The coalition has issued an ultimatum. They are demanding you be turned over to stand trial for war crimes. They claim you murdered coalition personnel in an unprovoked attack." Jake had expected something like this. "And our response?" "Officially, we have told them to go to hell. Unofficially, there are people in this government who think maybe we should negotiate. They worry about another war." Lisa's expression was hard. "I am not one of those people, but you need to understand the political pressure we are facing." One of the civilian leaders, a man named Gregory Shaw, who represented the outer colonies, spoke up. "Commodore, your actions at New Perth were effective. No one disputes that. But they have also made you a symbol. The coalition is not just demanding justice. They are demanding that we prove humans can be controlled, that we will hand over our own people to keep the peace." Jake looked around the room. Some faces showed support, others showed concern. A few looked actively hostile. "With respect, sir, the coalition does not want peace. They want submission. Handing me over would not satisfy them. It would just show weakness." "Easy for you to say," another civilian leader said sharply. "You are not the one who has to worry about blockades and sanctions. We have billions of people depending on trade with neutral systems. If the coalition cuts us off economically, people will suffer." "People are already suffering," Jake said, his voice harder now. "Every colony on the frontier lives in fear of coalition raids. Every human merchant ship that passes through their space pays illegal tariffs. Every day we hesitate, we invite more abuse. I am not the problem. I am the solution to a problem you have been ignoring." The room erupted in argument. Voices raised, accusations flew. Jake stood silently, letting them fight it out. He had seen this before 200 years ago. Politicians more worried about appearances than about protecting their own people. Admiral Lisa Grant finally raised her hand for silence. "Enough. Here is what is going to happen. Commodore Morrison will remain in Alliance custody, but he will not be turned over to the coalition. We will respond to their ultimatum with a counteroffer. They withdraw from all disputed border regions, and we agree to joint investigations of the New Perth incident. They will refuse, of course, but it buys us time." "Time for what?" Gregory Shaw asked. "Time to prepare," Lisa said. "Because whether we like it or not, the coalition is going to make a move. They cannot afford to look weak. Not after what happened at New Perth. We need to be ready." The meeting broke up shortly after. Jake was walking back to his quarters when Chris Hayes caught up with him. The young officer looked worried. "Sir, can I speak freely?" "Always." "There are people in the government who want to use you as a bargaining chip. I have heard rumors. Some of the civilian leaders think handing you over might prevent a war." Jake was not surprised. "Let them try. The moment they put me in chains, the military will mutiny. Too many people remember what the Confederation did to me. The Alliance was founded partly because of my story. Betraying that would destroy everything they built." "I hope you are right, sir." "So do I, Chris. So do I." That evening, Jake sat alone in his quarters, looking at Amy Parker's memorial file again. She had died believing he would never be freed. She had fought for 40 years, never giving up hope. And now, here he was, free but facing the same choice that had imprisoned him the first time. Save lives and break the rules, or follow the rules and watch people die. His hands clenched into fists. The anger that had sustained him through 2 centuries of frozen darkness was still there, burning just as hot. The galaxy had tried to break him. They had failed. He would not let them succeed now. A message came through on his terminal. Admiral Lisa Grant requesting a private meeting. Jake accepted immediately. Lisa's office overlooked Earth through a massive window. The planet rotated slowly below, blue and green and beautiful despite the scars of war. She gestured for Jake to sit. "I am going to be honest with you," she said. "The civilian leadership is divided.
Half want to support you.
Half want to hand you over. Right now it is about even. And you? I think you are exactly what the Alliance needs. Someone willing to do the hard things, make the tough calls. But I also know that symbols can be dangerous. You have become a lightning rod, Jake. Every action you take will be magnified. Every decision will be debated. Can you handle that?" Jake thought about it. "I did not ask to be a symbol. I just wanted to serve. But if being a symbol means protecting human lives, then I will carry that weight." Lisa nodded slowly. Good, because I have a mission for you. Something that will either prove you right or end your career permanently. She pulled up a star chart. 3 days ago, the Coalition moved a battle fleet into the Vega sector. It is a neutral zone, but they are claiming security concerns. We know the real reason. There is a civilian transport convoy scheduled to pass through Vega in 2 weeks. 20 ships carrying supplies to outer colonies. If the Coalition controls Vega, they can blockade that convoy. Starve out our colonies without firing a shot. You want me to stop them? I want you to do what you do best. Make them regret threatening us. Lisa's eyes were hard. But understand this. If you fail, if you give the Coalition any excuse to claim human aggression, the civilian leadership will hand you over. They will have no choice. The political pressure will be too great. And if I succeed, then maybe, just maybe, we can avoid a war while still maintaining our position. The Coalition needs to learn that humans are not easy targets, but they also need a way to back down without losing face completely. Jake studied the star chart. Vega sector. He could see the tactical situation clearly. The Coalition fleet was positioned to control key hyperspace routes. Hitting them directly would be difficult. But there were other options. I will need more ships. The Valiant alone is not enough for this. You will have them. I am assigning you command of Task Force 7. 5 ships total, all volunteers from crews who want to serve under you. Kate Sullivan will remain your executive officer. You leave tomorrow. Jake stood and saluted. I will not let you down, Admiral. I know you will not. But Jake, be careful. The galaxy is watching. Every move you make will be analyzed. Every decision questioned. You are not just fighting for the Alliance anymore. You are fighting for the idea that humans deserve to be treated as equals. That is what I was fighting for 200 years ago, Jake said quietly. Some things never change. That night, Jake could not sleep. He stood in his quarters looking out at Earth below. Somewhere down there in a cemetery he had never visited, Amy Parker was buried. She had fought her whole life for him. Now it was his turn to fight for what she believed in. The next morning, Task Force 7 assembled at the edge of Luna Station. 5 ships, each one deadly and efficient. The Valiant took the lead with Jake on the bridge. His crew moved with practiced confidence. They had drilled for weeks. They were ready. As the task force jumped into hyperspace heading toward Vega sector, Jake felt the familiar rush of command. This was what he was meant to do. Not to be a symbol or a legend, just to be a soldier doing his job, but he was also still angry. 200 years had not dulled that anger. It had refined it, focused it into something cold and sharp. The Confederation had tried to break him. The Coalition thought they could intimidate him. They were about to learn why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because humans remembered every wrong, carried every grudge, and never ever forgave. Jake Morrison had spent 2 centuries frozen in darkness, his anger preserved perfectly. Now that anger was awake, focused, and backed by some of the most advanced warships humanity had ever built, the Coalition wanted a symbol to blame. Fine. Jake would give them a symbol of why threatening humanity was the worst mistake any species could make. They had locked a human in Cryo-Prison. He had awoken 200 years later,